Well, hello there everyone and welcome back to this, the third part of my full guide on creating your own mod. Thanks for following this so far. Just a small suggestion, if you haven't checked out parts 1 and 2, in this video we will be carrying on from those previous parts, so I do advise you to go back and complete those parts if you can do before continuing with this one. For those of you that have been following along so far, well done. It's absolutely awesome that you made it this far. This video is going to give you a guide through how to set up your own custom scoreboard, and the skills that you'll learn during this video are quite transferable to pretty much any mod that you will make. In the future, I will have a standalone video that does teach you how to set up your own scoreboard, but it will cover mostly what we are going to cover in this guide to one degree or another. But I do know that this being part 3 of a 4-part guide, this may well get lost for some people. So look out for that if you're after a complete guide to the scoreboard. But this is going to cover all of the major points anyway, and it's going to be great if you want to add that nice looking scoreboard that tracks every stat that you want to. Now, before we continue and get cracking, I have had a few people contact me who were struggling with the code in the previous video. I do understand that it's quite complicated, especially if you haven't written any programs before, I guess. So to that end, I have now set up my GitHub website and you can get the code from there. So the code for part 2, if you're really struggling with that, you can now get the code for part 2 from my GitHub page. I will put a link to that in the description below. Go and grab the code for part 2 if you struggled through that, if you tried and then it just didn't work. I've got you covered. I will also be developing the full version of this Domination template through that GitHub site, so you can follow it yourself if you want to and grab the complete code from there. Again, I'll have a full video covering all of that, but for now let's crack on and continue developing this complete game mode of our own for Domination. So just a little recap of where we were up to after we finished for part 2, and we had at that point set up all of the capture points for capturing. They should be showing on your map, and the outer areas should be, we'd set up a combat area as well, so we'd set up the outer part of the map through the spatial editor, and at this point all of the main scoring for flag captures should be working, and the game will end when a team meets the target score for the game. And in this video we are going to extend that by adding tracking for the players, and we are going to finish setting up the scoreboard. Now, in the first video, we did set up, or at least start setting up, part of the scoreboard, and we used it for testing, if you remember, and we set the scoreboard up to have 2 teams, and we set it so that it would have the score showing at the top left-hand corner of each team, showing their current overall game score, and that was all working. And today we're going to work on the individual players. So I'm just going to go back through the important code that we added through part 1, which is kind of relevant to what we're going to do in this video. And you can see just here, there we had 2 lines of code which initialized the scoreboard. So this gave us a scoreboard, which is a custom 2-team scoreboard. So we've got mod.setScoreboardType, and we'd made that a 2-team scoreboard. Again, when I cover this in a more detailed video, we will look at the alternatives to this as well, but this is good to get you started. And then in the header, we had set this little message, and we'd set on the left-hand side of the scoreboard the message to be 0, and the message on the right to be 0 as well. So this initialized the scoreboard. It had set us with a custom 2-team scoreboard, and then set the scores for each team, one on the left, one on the right, to 0. And then we did a little extra function just a little bit further below. And this function, this update scoreboard total, ran regularly. You can see just here within the loop every second. And the totals in the scoreboard got updated. And we did that by getting the game mode score for team 1 and the game mode score for team 2. So we got score 1 and score 2. And then we set the scoreboard header, same line as we did above just here, and we set it to have a message. And the scoreboard header consists of 2 parts, if you remember, and the left hand side is for the team on the left in the header, and the right hand side is for the team on the right. You can see we created a message, and we put the score for team 1 on the left hand side, and the score for team 2 on the right hand side. So just check that you've got those functions in there, because we're going to be building up quite a bit off this initial platform, but we do need to make sure that at the very least the scoreboard is showing and initialized and set up. Right, let's move on with the next bit. So the first thing that we're going to do is set up the scoreboard itself. So we are going to initialize the scoreboard. The scoreboard needs to know what the column headings are. So the column names for each column that we are going to record some data in. So for example, we might have a column for the player's score, the player's number of kills, the player's number of deaths, the player's number of captures, etc., etc. And we can also set the widths of each column within the scoreboard as well. So we're going to create a function in order to do that. So let's start. So we'll call this function set up scoreboard. Seems reasonable. Set up scoreboard. And it doesn't need any parameters, so we're just going to put the code within there. So how do we set up this scoreboard? Well, we are going to do mod dot set scoreboard column names, I think it's called, scoreboard column names. There we go, just tab across, and then we're going to open a bracket. And you can see in here, it just tells us that we have a sequence of mod messages. These mod messages are basically what is the title that goes in the header of the scoreboard. So if we want it to say K for kills, or we want it to say kills, we just set up each column heading. I hope that makes sense, but it will do once I have finished this. I'm not sure I described that particularly well. So let's go with mod dot message. So that's going to set up this first message. And what we're going to put in there, well, I'm going to make this a little bit more flexible. I'm going to use that String.json again, so I can play around with it a little bit. Hopefully you'll see what's going to happen here, but I'm going to go with mod dot, what's that, a dot, not dot, string keys. And then I'm going to put scoreboard, or SB, head 1. Okay, now obviously I've not set that up yet. Sorry, I just misspelled that. Now obviously I've not put SB head in the strings JSON just yet, but I am going to do shortly, and this is going to give me a little bit more flexibility about what I put in the actual scoreboard. It's going to make it more flexible. So you should be able to go ahead now and add, maybe if we had 4 columns, one for the score, one for the kills, one for the deaths, and one for the captures. So I'll make this one, this one's going to be the score. Maybe you could go ahead and add the extra 3 for the next 3 headings. Should be relatively simple. I'm just going to pause for a second and you can go on and complete it. Okay, you should have gone on and completed that and paused it. If not, I'm going to go ahead and do it myself. I am going to do my usual, which is just copy these. We don't really need to spend too much time on this, but I'm going to have 4 headings. Of course, if you want to have more than that, you can do, but it's important to know that for every heading, we are going to have to track those statistics somehow, and we'll need to find a method of tracking them. So I'm going to give you the way to track these ones. So we're going to have kills as the second one. These are just comments to remind me of which heading is which, and we can reorder them later if we want to. We've got deaths, and then we will also track captures. Obviously at the moment I'm not tracking assists or anything like that. We can extend this later, but we will have to track that manually. Everything that goes in the scoreboard needs to be tracked by us. Just mistakenly put an extra comma on the end. So that is your finished first part of the setup scoreboard function. And then in addition, we're just going to set the widths of the scoreboard. I'll show you how to do that. So we can widen or narrow the column widths. So to do that, we do mod dot set scoreboard, and I think it's scoreboard column widths just there. That was the second part. And then in there, we are going to set the width of each column. Now, in actual fact, I do think it's more beneficial to use a variable. So let's do that. And then we can set them all to the same size. So we'll go with let column width equal 10. All right. And then just inside this, rather than putting the number 10, we're going to put column width. Now, it seems kind of counterintuitive, I guess. But what that means is if we want to alter the column widths, we can just alter that one figure just up above. Anyway, column width. Did we have 4 columns? We did. Column width. There we go. and that's it. So we set up the widths for each column. Like I said, if we wanted to alter the column widths, we could do. We just needed to change this number and it will make it wider or narrower. But for now, we're just going to stick with 10 because I'm pretty sure that that will work. Now that we've done that, I think it might be worth looking at the code that we did before. So this initialize the scoreboard section just up here, and it might be worth us moving this into this function that we just wrote, this setup scoreboard, and making sure everything gets done at once. So hopefully you're following along here, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the code that initialized the scoreboard just here. I am going to copy it and I am going to paste it into the setup scoreboard function just there. And then I'm going to go back to where we initialize the scoreboard just here. And I am going to type in set up scoreboard. And I'm going to make it so that it calls that little function that we just wrote before. I'm just going to say once again what I did there. We had a couple of lines initially in this on game mode started just at the top. That kind of initialized the scoreboard, just set the headers, and that helped us for part 2. But here we're just extending that a little bit, and we have now written an additional function that sets up the scoreboard totally. It's going to set the scoreboard type to be a custom 2 teams, initialize the score, set the scoreboard column names, set the width of the columns, and that's fantastic. And then what I've done is I've just called that function just above up there. Okay, we still haven't finished yet because we still have the question of these strings just down here, these SB head 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we're going to do those as well right now. Okay, so if you remember from part 2, we already did a strings.json value and we set the score like that. Now what we're going to do next is we are going to set SB head 1, 2, and 3, and 4 text in here as well. So this is going to be the text that will appear in place of those string keys. So let's go with SB head 1, and I think this one we will make the player's score just like that. Come on. Right, okay, so I want you to go on now and do the same for SB head 2, 3, and 4. Do you remember what order they went in? I think it was kills, deaths, and captures. Okay, go ahead and add those to your strings file. Okay, I'm going to add those to my strings file as well. Once again, we can just copy and paste if we want to. Let's go like that, that, and that. They're a little bit out of sync. You know what I'm like, I like everything aligned correctly. So let's just get those backspaced a little bit. Oops, there we go. So we got 2. We've got 3, and we've got 4, and we need to make sure we don't have this extra comma on the end. Just there, that's it, it's saved. So now let's just change the text that appears. So that one was score, this one is kills, this one is deaths, that one is captures. And of course you could just use letters if you wanted to, SKDC. But I'm going to use the full word itself so it makes it clear what the value under that column means. Let's just check that we've got those in the right order. So we've got score, kills, deaths, and captures. Let's go back to our script and let's have a look. We've got score, kills, deaths, and captures. That's all looking good. Looks like we've got our scoreboard set up. We will just test it in game in a moment to double check. And I will just leave this on the screen momentarily so you can double check that you've copied it correctly. Right, let's move on to the next step, which is player tracking. So let's get on with tracking each of the statistics that we want to appear in the scoreboard table. Now for each player, we're obviously going to need some player variables to track those values. Now, because we're working in TypeScript, there are a number of advanced features of programming that we could take advantage of. And in the templates that I actually distribute, I am going to use those features because they do make it quite extensible. But for those following along with this tutorial, what we're actually going to use is the built-in object variables that are provided by Portal itself. This is useful because if you're following on with blocks, you just need to create these as global variables or player variables or whatever it might be, and we can use those variables within the blocks or within the program. So if you're following along with blocks, you just need to create a player variable for each of these things, but we're just going to create the variable at the top to begin with. So we're going to have const player kills equals 0. Now it's important to note before we continue that this value here, this 0, that isn't actually the initial value of player kills. This is actually going to reference a player variable. Now again, this is probably not going to make much sense, but it will when we implement it. But just worth bearing in mind, we are not giving this a value which is its initial value. So we're not setting player kills to 0. We are saying that this is the variable with the index of 0, or this is the variable numbered 0. So with that in mind, if we want to set the other variables for these players, then we are going to have to do const player deaths and give this another value. So this is the next on the list. Then we are going to do const player score, give that the next value on the list, which equals 2. And then we will do const player captures. It is captures. And we'll make that the next on the list. So we have 4 variables. These variables which will be applied to the player object are numbered 0, 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to go on and use these in our functions below. Obviously, one more time, there are many other ways to do this within the game. I'm just exploiting the fact that each object in the portal engine has variables that can be attached to it, and we're going to use that so we can follow along with the blocks. Right, let's move on and deal with these in the actual script itself. Okay, so let's set the initial values of these to 0 for each player when they join the game. So we're going to trigger this using the event for on player join game. And I think we'll do all of this right at the bottom so we can track and make sure we can understand where all of our changes are. So let's go with export function on player join game. Okay, we'll open a bracket. And when a player joins the game, we're going to need the event player themselves. So we've got event player, and there will be a mod dot player. Excellent. Player. Okay, so once they've joined the game, we are going to initialize all of the variables for that player. So the built-in function that allows us to do that is mod dot object variable. Then we open a bracket and then we say the object that we want to apply this variable to. So the object in this case will be the event player, comma, and the item that we want to, the variable itself, I should say, is the, what was it, player kills, if that's the value that we are setting. And let's leave it at that. I think that's it for now. Okay, so why not assign the values to the other object variables for this event player? I'll just give you a moment to do that. We're just initializing all of these variables for the player and giving them the initial values that we want them to have. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's set the object variable for this player for the other items as well. So we've got object variable. In actual fact, let's just copy and paste. It's going to make my life a little bit easier. As usual, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. Let's get these all lined up. So we've got 4 object variables for a player. 1 was the kills, 1 was the deaths, if I remember rightly. 1 was the captures. Doing this in a different order than I did before. And 1 was the score. So that initializes all of the players' variables that's keeping track of the score. Right, we can move on now and we can start to add values to these and place them in the scoreboard. So let's start by tracking the number of kills that a player has made. So every time the player makes a kill, we are going to increase their number of kills variable, so the stat that tracks the number of kills that they have made. So we have an event that can trigger when the player gets a kill. So let's use that. Export function on player earned kill. Open a bracket. Now this function gets passed a few items, and along with those items get passed is the player that made the kill. So we've got event player. They are the mod.player. Now obviously other items get passed along with this event, but we're just going to make use of the mod player here, this event player that gets passed, because that's the player that we're going to update the statistic for. So we have a variable for this player, this object variable, and we're just going to set the value in that variable to be whatever it was before. Initially it would be 0 plus 1 for this kill that's just been made. So it's quite a long line of code if this is this one, but we're going to use the actual built-in blocks in order to set this object variable. So we're going to go with mod.setVariable. Now obviously we're using the built-in TypeScript. This would be a little bit easier. Well, at least I think it would be, but this way you can follow on with the blocks if you need to, and obviously you can see how we can exploit the in-game functions to be able to do what we want to be able to do. So mod.setVariable. Well, next we need to say which variable it is that we are setting. So it is mod dot object variable. So this is the variable that we want to set, and it is the variable for, oh, it's the event player, isn't it? Event player. And it is the what was it, player kills variable for that player. And then the next part of this is what value we want to set it for. So we need to first get the value in the current player kills variable for this player and then add 1 to it. It's going to be quite a long line. Is this going to be quite difficult to follow, but I'll recap once we have finished typing in the entire thing. So we are going to again use the block functions rather than the built-in TypeScript, and we're going to go with mod dot, but we need to get variable, and in this case we need to get the mod dot object variable, which is for the event player, and it is player kills, and then we need to add 1 to it. Finally, we're going to use the built-in add function to add 1 to this number of kills. So we're going to wrap that around this. So we're going to put mod dot add. I'm going to open a bracket just there. So we're going to add to this variable. Then we're going to, let's just check where our brackets are. We've got 3 open. So it's going to go, I think, just there, but no, just outside that one. And then we're going to put comma 1. That's going to add. I think we need to add another bracket on the end. That's it. So it's quite a complicated line, is that? Let's just explain one more time what's going on here. We need to set a variable, and we can see that that is surrounded by the brackets. So we were going to set this variable that is on the left hand side, so the object variable for the event player that's called player kills, and we are going to set this object variable's value to whatever is in this section just here, and that will be add to whatever's in the player kills variable currently, the value 1. Now I have to say it reads a lot better if you're doing it in the blocks. You can see this a little bit more clearly, but that basically mimics the way that it would be done in blocks. I think this is a little bit easier for us rather than using something like a dictionary like I do in my main code, but obviously if you want to see that done another way you can always check out my template later on. So let's also update the player's score as well. So player score will equal get the variable for the player score. And what is a reasonable value to add to that? Well, let's give them 20 points for a kill. And that's it. That is going to set the player kills variable to be whatever it currently is +1 or add 1, and set the player score variable to whatever the value currently is +20. And that's it. Now we just need to get this to display in the scoreboard. So we could put this directly into the scoreboard in the onPlayerEarnedKill function, but instead we're going to create a little helper function as we have done before, which is going to allow us to constantly update the scoreboard as the game progresses. So we're going to call this function update player scoreboard. And this function is going to update the stats for a particular player. So we'll go with mod.player. So we need to know which player we are updating the scoreboard for. So as you'd expect, Portal comes with a built-in function to be able to update a particular player's scoreboard stats, and that is mod.setScoreboard. And can I see it on there? Scoreboard player values. There we go. So set scoreboard player values, and we'll just open a bracket, and within this we just need to provide it with a number of values. So you'll see that the first value is the player that we want to update the values for. So let's go with player. That's the player that we've just passed. So it's this player that we need to set to the values for. And then we need to set the values to particular items. So what was the first column? Well, I think the first column was score. So let's go with mod.getVariable. And we need to get the object variable for the player. And it is player score. I'm just going to type that a little bit too quickly. I'm just going to check that that's correct. It does look okay. That's perfectly fine. So we're going to set the scoreboard player values for this player. And in the first column, this is the first value, we're going to get the variable for the player, which is player score. And then we can just go ahead and do the other three. Why don't you just go on and fill in the other three values just here to set the other scoreboard values. And we're nearly there. We're going to finish this up shortly. Okay, I'm going to set the other values now. So I'm going to copy this, make my life easy. Let's go like that. We've got the other three columns just ready to go, and we just need to change the variable. So in the second column we had the kills, I think in the third column we had the deaths, and in the final column we had the captures, and I think that's okay. So finally all we need to do, just check that your function is correct. So we've got this helper function, update the player scoreboard, that takes a player to update. And then when we run this function and pass it a player, it is going to set the player values in the scoreboard for that player. And the first column will be that value, second, third, fourth, and so on. So now all we need to do whenever we want to update the player scoreboard is call that function and send it a player. So we can do that now in this onPlayerEarnedKill function just to finish it off. So let's go with update player scoreboard. That's the right one. And let's pass it the event player. That's it. All done. Should be working. I'm just going to leave this on the screen for a moment so you can see all of that working together. You can see we're using the built-in object variables. This makes it a little bit easier to follow with the blocks, I think. If not, don't worry, I will do something about that later on. But you can see we've got onPlayerJoinGame, set all of the object variables for that event player. Just get them started. And then we have this function that's updates a player scoreboard, and that sets all the values in the scoreboard to the right values. And then we've got this final one, which is on the player earned kills. So when someone kills someone, we get the event player. We are going to add 1 to their number of kills and 20 to their score. Now I have just noticed that just up here, I didn't actually initialize these values, and I probably should have done. So I think we are going to have to initialize these variables when the game starts. It's quite easy to do instead of just writing this like that, and a really bit of an oversight from me. And we are going to just instead go with mod set variable, and we're going to set this player kills variable, the object variable for the event player, and we are going to set that to 0. And I think that that should resolve the problem. We just need to do the same with the others. Maybe you want to press on ahead and just make sure that these are initialized as well. I'm going to start typing myself now. So I think it might be easier if we just kind of do each one individually. So we'll go with mod.set variable, and we're going to set that one also to 0, just like so. And we need to do the other ones. I think I'm just going to be a little bit more lazy now and copy that. Can't believe how lazy this has got, but there you go. Set the variable, open a bracket, set that one to 0, and do the final one as well. Set that one to 0. There we go. So we are, when the player joins the game, now we are setting their object variable player kills. We're setting them all deaths, captures, score to be 0. That's initializing the variables. Put a little comment in there. Initialize players variables, so we know what we've done there. So now that we've done that, let's also make sure that the scoreboard reflects those values when a player joins the game, so we're not worrying too much about that. So we have that function, update player scoreboard, so let's use it. Update player scoreboard, and let's pass the event player to it. So we're just making sure that nothing lags over. I mean, in reality, it shouldn't do from one game mode to another, but I have seen that happen. So when a player joins the game, we are going to set all of their initial values to 0, and we are going to update the player scoreboard for that player, and hopefully we should see zeros across the board for that player. So let's just take a moment to reflect now that we have a working scoreboard that shows the score for kills and the number of kills a player has completed. So the scoreboard's updating accurately, which is great to see. And you can see on your screen the code. I will just do my usual thing of pausing it for a moment in a minute and letting you copy that and double check everything that you've done, because it's quite complicated. So we do have now a working scoreboard, and all we have to do is connect up the other scoring events, which is for when a player dies and for when a player captures a point. So here's the code we have so far. Double check. Remember that you also need to declare those global variables at the top, and I'll make sure to show them in a minute as well, and then we will come back and finish this off. Okay, so there we go. So we have this event on player earned kill, and I'm going to set an extra long challenge for you. It's not extra long, it's just going to take you maybe a minute or two. But I want you to write the code that will track the number of times a player has died. Now there is an event which is on player died, and when a player dies, this event runs, and it also sends you the player or the event player that died. So can you work out from what we've done already how to write the function that will add 1 to the player's number of deaths and update the scoreboard each time a player on the team dies? Now I will write it in a minute, but let's pause the video, have a look at the code that's there, and see if we can change it to update that particular event as well. Okay, so this function should be nice and easy. In actual fact, it's very similar to the on player earned kill event, so much so that I'm going to copy that code and paste it over. And then we have, rather than on player earned kill, we have on player died. So we do get the event player passed as the player who died. But in this case, we don't want to set the player kills variable. We want to set the player deaths variable, and we're going to set the player death variable to be whatever the player deaths currently is, and we're going to add 1 to that. I don't think we need to give them any score for when they die. That doesn't make any sense, does it? You don't get points for dying in this game, unless of course you've got an interesting game mode that you're setting up. But we will want to also, once we've added one to that score, update the player's scoreboard for this event player to reflect that event. And that's it. We have now got a working scoreboard that tracks the number of times a player earns a kill and the number of times a player has died. Now then, at this point you could stop. In theory, we don't need to track the player captures, and this is a little bit trickier, but I think I'm going to go through that because I know that people will probably want this statistic on a domination scoreboard, so it makes sense to include this. But you already have a good awareness of how to update the scoreboard, hopefully, using these functions, and you could probably extend this more to add additional tracking variables if you wanted to for other events. So for example, if you wanted to add on, and maybe that's a little challenge that I'll give to you, the number of assists that a player has managed to achieve, you should by now understand what changes you need to make. So for example, you're going to have to add another global player variable, maybe call it player assists. We are going to have to initialize those values when the player joins the game, and then we are going to have to include it in the update of the scoreboard and the scoreboard columns and all of that. Not going to run through it. Maybe you can work that out for yourself. Maybe you'll set yourself a little challenge for the next video. Right, okay, so final thing to do now, track the number of times a player has captured a point. So this function is a little trickier. It's not really related to the scoreboard. It's more related to making sure that we can track how many times a player has captured something. And the difficulty with the on capture point captured event that is available in the game is that it doesn't supply you with the players that were on there that captured it. We need to get them ourselves. So we are going to tap into this on capture point captured event. We are going to get the capture point that was captured, and then we are going to count ourselves the number of players that were on that particular objective. So let's start writing that. So we're going to go with export function on capture point captured, spell it right, capture point captured. That's the event. And we get with this the event capture point that was captured. Mod dot capture point. Okay, so that's the capture point that was captured, and we are going to write the function just inside here that's going to update for every player that was on that capture point the number of points that they captured. Now there are a few steps that we need to go in to be able to do that. So let's start off by getting all of the players that were on that particular capture point at the time that it was captured. So let's go with const players on point, made a little variable, and we do have a function that's able to get that, so we can do mod dot get players on point, and we just need to pass it the capture points that we're looking at. So how many players on a point? You can run this anywhere at any point, but obviously we need to know who was on the point at the point that it was captured. So event capture point, there we go. All right, so the players on the point is going to get me what's called an array, so a collection of all the players. We want a collection of all the players, get the players that were on the point of that event capture point. Excellent. So the next thing that we need to do is find out who is the owner of that point now. So which team owns that point? Because we're going to need to filter out of all of these players, which players are the actual team that owns that point. So let's go with current owner. And all these functions are built in. It's just a shame we can't just get the players on the point straight away for the team that owns it. We've got to do it all ourselves. So mod dot get current owner team. So this is going to tell us which team owns this capture point, event capture point. So far, so good. All right, so now we know who the players were that were on the point, and we also know which team now owns that capture point. So next, and we are going to have to dig into a little bit of a more complicated programming technique. We're effectively going to get the number of players that were on the point. We are going to loop through all of those players And we're going to check each player to see if they are on the team that currently owns the point. If they are going to get an additional capture point on the scoreboard table. So we are going to go const total players on point, and then we are going to get the length of, or the count of, mod, what's wrong with me there, mod dot count of, then players on point. Spell that wrong as well. Not good when people are watching, is it? Keep it slick. So you can see we get the players on point. That's the collection of all the players that are on the point, and then we are going to count how many players are in that collection. So we know how many players are in there, and we can loop through them all then. So let's go with 4. So this is a loop. It's a fixed one, by the way. Let I equal 0. So that's where a counter starts off from, and a for loop just counts from one value to another. So we're going to start from 0. We are going to keep counting I up while it is less than the total number of players on the point. And then finally, on every loop, we are going to add 1 to I. So I is just a counter, and if there were 10 players on the point, then I will count from 0 all the way up to 10, well actually up to 9, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And for any programmers out there, we are dealing with 0 indexed arrays, so the players on the point will have 10 items in it, but the first player in that array will be at position 0, and the last one will be at position 9, which is why we count up to just 1 point less there, if that made sense. Well done. All right, so we are going to get the current player, so we're going to loop through all the players. So const, let's call this the player that we want, and they will equal mod whatever the value in the array is, players on point at position I. So that gets us a player from this players on point array. So the current player in this loop will be a value in the array called players on point, and whichever player is at position I. Scroll up a little bit. Now we need to check to see if the player that we are currently looking at is on the team that currently owns the objective. Starts to get tricky from here on in. But we've got if mod dot equals. So if the team, it's get team, isn't it? Get team. If the team for this player equals the current owner team, which is fantastic. So if the team for the player that we're currently looking at equals the current owner, then, well, we found a player that is on that team, haven't we? So we can increment the number of captures for that player and their score. Now in here, we're going to put a line that we have done before, but make a small adjustment. So can you increment or add 1 to the number of captures for this player? And can you also give them a score that you think is suitable for points per capture? I'm thinking we just give them 20 points, but you can give them whatever you like. Right, I'm just going to give it a moment, see if you can get that line in there, and then I'll show you how that's done once again. Okay, so the line here is just basically the same as this line here. So we're going to grab all of this in on player earned kill, and we're going to paste it in just below. We're just going to save ourselves typing out these complicated lines again. You can see it's got a couple of underscores there, and the reason for that is that it's not the event player, but the player we're looking at. So we're going to say mod set variable, get the object variable for the player. You can see we've got this player here, and set the player captures to be, let's again get the object variable for the player, and player captures, and let's add 1 to it. Let's do the same underneath. So we're going to change the score for the player that we are currently looking at. And we are going to do the same there. We're going to get the player's current score and add 20 to it. Finally, we'll update the scoreboard, but this time for that player. Okay, and that should be that. We now have a working scoreboard. Hopefully, I'm going to check in a minute for every single event on that scoreboard. So we're updating the score for the number of kills. We're updating the number of deaths on the scoreboard, and we are now updating the number of capture points that a player has captured. I'm gonna once again leave this function on the screen for you to copy from. It has been quite tough here because we've been using some functions that we wouldn't necessarily normally come across, but it's been useful because we've explored how to look at object variables or variables that we use in blocks, and we've also looked at how we can count up on the scoreboard the number of times a player has captured a point, which is quite a cool thing to do if you ask me. Hopefully this has been a little bit easier to follow along with on the blocks. Right, let's leave that there. Let's have a look and check that the whole scoreboard is working as it should do. Okay, so here we are in game. We'll just check that the scoreboard is working, all headings showing correctly and set to 0. That's great. We'll just play a little bit, get a few things on the scoreboard, and while we do that, let me just say that this is the end of this third part of this tutorial. I've got one more part to do, and then that will be the end, and I'll put out a final polishing thing because we've learned a couple of things since I started this that might be helpful. Just check the scoreboard, everything seems to be okay. Yeah, we've learned a couple of things since I started this that might be helpful to you in the future, and I'm also going to put out my templates on GitHub. If you're interested in getting the code that we've got so far, I now have a link to my GitHub page, and I'll put that in the description below, and you can get lots of stuff from there, and I'll be adding more as we go. And of course, I'll be uploading this to bfportal.gg as well, the experience, so you'll be able to get my version of it, my complete version of it, along with all of the maps ready for you to edit. Right, that does it. Hope you've enjoyed it so far. I hope this was okay, and I hope you are now in a position to be able to set up your own scoreboard. Do let me know how you've been getting on with this. It's been quite a long time, so if you're still here, well done. And just one more to go. Part 4 will be looking at the custom UI. You can see that on my screen at the top. Looking quite nice now. I've made some changes to it since we started out. But yeah, that's the final part, and I will see you in that one very soon. Take care, everyone. Till the next one. Ta-ra.